consists of two assumptions, such as one of them being each life begins with a blank slate and all behavior comes from interactions with our environment. Another assumption is that we learn everything through social learning, operant conditioning, classical conditioning. In this approach, there are studies like Bandura, Fagan, and Savanger and Silverman. These studies are under the same concept of the learning approach. However, they all found results in a different way depending on what they were experimenting about.
Albert Bandura was a psychologist at Stanford University and died in July of 2021. He believed that seeing a non-aggressive model would stop aggression. Past research showed that children have a tendency to imitate same-sex models more frequently because of gender stereotypes. The psychology investigated in Bandura et al. Was social learning, which is learning a new behavior by observing it in a role model and imitating the behavior later in the absence of the model. Another piece of psychology investigated was aggression, which is behavior where the intention is to harm another person or object. Bandura et al. Has two aims. The first one is investigate whether children imitate aggression of a model in the absence of the model. The second one is to investigate whether children are more likely to imitate the behavior of a same-sex model. Bandura et al. Was a lab experiment with a matched pairs design. The DV was behavior of children, and the three independent variables was model type, model sex, and learner sex. The children were matched by being observed by the teacher and one researcher before the study on 4 tests of aggression. Then they were assigned to groups of 3. The sample was 72 children ages 3 to 6, with 36 boys and 36 girls, and they were recruited from the Stanford University Nursery School.
During the procedure, the researchers had set up 3 different conditions, which meant one group had a children observe an aggressive model, one with a non-aggressive model, and a control group who had no model. Then there were 3 stages where stage 1 was potato painting, and in the opposite side of the room there was Bobo the clown. In stage 2, all participants were mildly annoyed to provoke aggression, which took 5 minutes, where the model would take the kids to the toys and take them away. Stage 3 is where they were going to interact with Bobo, imitating the models, and the behavior was observed by male through a one-way mirror for 20 minutes. They were more likely to play with aggressive toys like guns, while girls prefer dolls and tea sets. It shows how observing behavior can influence what kids choose to play with, especially when it comes to gender stereotypes. It had also found boys are more likely to imitate the same-sex models than girls. The boys scored higher than the girls in the study overall. The strength in the study was standardization, as it kept the same number of minutes between conditions and the same people and procedure with the same acts reenacted by the model. Another strength is inter-observer reliability, where in half the conditions there were 2 observers who compared the results from what they seen. Weakness in the study was ethics, where they broke 6 out of 7 of them following only debriefing. Another weakness is generalizability, as it is a small sample size and they all come from the same socioeconomic background, meaning they kind of come from money.
It all started when in 2011 the Nepalese government introduced annual tuberculosis testing of captive elephants. However, training like this was usually done with aversive stimuli. Aversive stimuli is often seen as inhumane and involves causing discomfort to the animals in order to train them. The study by Fagan et al. Investigates operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a reward or punishment that will change the likelihood of a behavior being performed again. However, Fagan et al. Specifically studied positive reinforcement, which is being rewarded for the behavior creating a higher likelihood of it being performed again. A primary reinforcer is a reward that meets a basic need, like getting food. Secondary reinforcer is something that becomes associated with a primary reinforcer that makes it easier to administer. Fagan aimed to investigate whether secondary positive reinforcement could be used to train the elephants. The study was observational and set in a controlled environment where 5 female elephants were trained. 4 of the elephants were juveniles aged 5 to 7, and 1 of the elephants was an adult. These elephants were selected because they were particularly tame. The elephants were given the option to walk away if they didn't want to participate, and the training sessions took place at varying times depending on when the mahouts decided. The mahouts taught various behaviors like trunk here, where the elephant places the end of its trunk into the palm of the trainer, blow, where the elephant is trained to blow air, and steady, where they hold their trunk in a specific still position.
Here, trunk up, blow, steady, stay in a position, and then put it into the bucket. And then blow.
These behaviors are shaped using rewards for natural behaviors. They built these behaviors by rewarding the elephants for natural behaviors that they already did and gradually increased the accuracy of the behaviors in order to get the reward so they could train them. During the training, they pried the primary reinforcer, which was food, with a secondary reinforcer, which was the whistle. In the study, the results took some time, but were still promising. After just 10 sessions, the success rate was 39%, but by the 35th session, that rate jumped to an impressive 89.3%. The elephants had learned to complete the behaviors in the correct sequence, demonstrating the power of positive reinforcement. Overall, the study by Fagan et al. Highlights the effectiveness and power that positive reinforcers and secondary reinforcers can have on the training of animals. Fagan's study was extremely effective with no discomfort being caused to the elephants. The results from Fagan's study show that it's possible to change the way we treat animals and the way we train them.
A strength of Fagan is that she followed all the animal ethics, but you could argue that she broke housing. Another strength is ecological validity because it was done in the elephant's natural environment. A weakness of Fagan is generalizability because it was a small sample size and there were all elephants in captivity and they were all females. Another weakness is situational variables for the adult because the adult had a lot of distractions and she was the only elephant not born in captivity. The psychology investigated in Saavedra and Silverman is evaluative learning, which is a type of classical conditioning where a neutral stimulus is paired with something a person finds disgusting. Phobias are also investigated, which is intense fear or anxiety that occurs when a person comes into contact with an object or situation. The background to this case study is that the button boy had dropped a bowl of clear plastic buttons in front of his class in kindergarten, and he was so embarrassed that he became disgusted by buttons, so therefore he has this button phobia. The aims are highlight the role of evaluative learning and discuss in the development and treatment of children's phobias, test the efficacy of imagery exposure therapy as part of an exposure-based cognitive behavioral treatment for a specific phobia of buttons. The methods used is a longitudinal case study, and they use both qualitative and quantitative data, and they use interviews, questionnaires, and observations. The sample was a 9-year-old Hispanic American boy from Florida, USA. His mom had brought him into FIU Miami to seek treatment for his phobia of buttons. He had been living with a phobia for 4 years, and he did not have any other disorders. The measure variables is approach behaviors, avoidance behaviors, and feeling thermometer score from 0 to 8. The procedure of Saavedra and Silverman was done in 4 parts. The first part was the initial assessment/diagnosis, which made sure he fit the diagnostic criteria The second part is behavioral exposure therapy, and in these sessions they created a discuss/fear hierarchy and had in vivo exposures. The third part was imagery exposure therapy, but it was all in the imagination. The fourth part was the post-treatment, which was when he was interviewed for his phobia diagnosis immediately after the treatment, 6 months later and 12 months later. The results of the study was very beneficial, as it showed that behavioral exposure therapy did help with getting him to hold the buttons. It increased his distress. Imagery exposure therapy was the key factor in disgust-based phobias, as it decreased his distress. The post-treatment, at the 6-month and 12-month follow-ups, the boy no longer met the criteria for phobias. He reported no distress about buttons, and he wore his school uniform with small clear plastic buttons every day.
The Saavedra and Silverman study suggests that evaluative learning is an important way to understand how disgust plays a role in childhood-specific phobias. Their findings show that children may develop phobias not just from fear, but also from feelings of disgust. The study also highlights that while exposure therapy can help with fear-based phobias, imagery exposure therapy is needed for phobias driven by disgust. Strengths of this study include test-retest reliability. The study used the same interview before, during, and after the treatment. This helped ensure the results were consistent over time. They also conducted this interview with other children, adding to the reliability of the findings. A second strength is internal validity. The study used a longitudinal design which allowed researchers to observe the long-term effects of the treatment. This is a strong point, as it showed the treatment's lasting efficiency in reducing phobias over time. A weakness of the study is generalizability. One of the major weaknesses is that the study's findings can't be applied to everyone. It focused on a single child, so it's difficult to say whether the results would be the same for adults, children with other phobias, or children in different areas. A second weakness is internal validity/reliability. Most of the data came from the boy and his mom, which can introduce bias. Additionally, the therapist's views could have influenced the results, making the data less objective and reliable.